This is the Subvert the Weekly podcast where we talk about a diverse array of subjects, everything from science to technology to economics, health, the way the brain ticks. And as we like to say, by the time you're finished listening to this or watching this, your brain and your thoughts may be reconstructed. At least they should be. At least we're working towards that. I'm Alex Knight, still sequestered in my fortress of solitude here because the pandemic is still happening. I'm joined by Aaron Stewart.
Why, hello there.
And Kristin Rumohr.
Hello.
Hey, guys. Everyone looks like they're still in their bunker. Things haven't changed much in the last 7 days.
The duct tape is still intact around all the windows, yes. So,
yeah, exactly.
Sealed up solid.
We all have our hazmat suits when we need to go outside. So there's that, right? Everyone?
Well,
no, just me. I'm the only one wearing
your hazmat suit now, so it's kind of you have to at least have it.
Hazmat suits are hard to come by.
Spray when you walk in the door.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was very expensive to install at my place. I must say, it was a lot of money. A lot of money. But we're not here to talk about awful pandemic things.
No, never, ever, because that's definitely not on the forefront of everybody's minds lately. So
yeah, exactly.
We want to talk about that on a podcast about talking about that kind of shit. I mean, geez.
Yeah, that's all we ever hear about.
Yeah, we're here to talk about the brain today, and there was two very interesting articles here that they're related here. There's an article on theconversation.com written by Miguel Farias, and the headline is, "Are the brains of atheists different to those of religious people?" So there have been some studies that have been happening on this subject, and also I will also say another very interesting study. People with homophobia are more likely to have low IQ, according to current research. This was an article posted on Mashable by Dale Jong Wong recently in the last day or so. We'll get to that in a bit. But let's start off with the atheist topic. Are the brains of atheists different? So I'm just going to read a little bit of this, kind of a summary of this article. This is a cognitive study of religion, and it involves Richard Dawkins. It's very, very interesting. Have either of you guys had a chance to read this article?
Yeah, I read that one. That was great.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's very interesting, the idea that the temporal lobes may be the seat of religious experience since the 1960s. You know, I'm sure you guys have all seen documentaries about people that were near death or on the operating table. Maybe they were clinically dead for as long as a minute, maybe 2 minutes at the most. And they always seem to have this universal experience about seeing the white light or seeing these ethereal beings, or it's always some kind of religious experience. And I find that fascinating.
Nobody ever goes to hell?
That's a good question.
That's an interesting one. Yeah,
how come?
Exactly.
Yeah, how come that isn't a thing?
Screaming in the pits of darkness and like the cries of despair. Like, why is nobody ever going to all of these people that are coming back are all the saints that we like? Oh no, God didn't want them, so He sent them back. Right? Like, that doesn't seem.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm still waiting for that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Just one person to come back and just be like, "Oh my God, it was horrible."
Yeah. Okay, so
it would give a lot more credibility to the whole thing, though, wouldn't it?
You'd think, instead of it just being the one, everybody sees a white light. Well, that's just neurons firing in your brain, not knowing how to. Right, like that has nothing to do with God taking you or any kind of religious epiphanies or anything.
Well, I mean,
right?
it might. We don't.
It
fully
might.
know that.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, I don't believe it's in any sense that we've grasped here or tried to put any kind of name to in terms of, the religious, I guess doctrine or whatever that we follow here. Right. Like I don't think anyone here has it quite right yet. But
indeed.
Yeah.
So There was a study done in 2012, so 3 articles published by labs in the USA and Canada presented the first evidence linking an analytical, logical thinking style to unbelief. Psychologists have been theorizing about different ways that brains process information for a long time. conscious versus unconscious, reflective versus experiential, analytical versus intuitive. These are linked to activity in certain brain areas and can be triggered by stimuli, including art. That's very interesting.
Well, what kind of, I guess, prompted this whole thing was when they hooked Richard Dawkins up to the God machine, right? Which is essentially a network of magnets that you can place on someone's skull that essentially use directed magnetism to stimulate the temporal lobe, as you were mentioning,
Yes.
which can recreate the epiphany and euphoria of these religious experiences. Right. So basically, you can be sitting there just having a normal day, having your cereal. They can flip this machine on, and suddenly you're seeing God and angels and all of these manifest things going on. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But when they hooked Richard Dawkins up to it,
Yeah.
this machine had no effect. It didn't do anything to him, and he was sitting there chewing his breakfast, going, well, "What do you want? Right? Like, what's going? Are you going to turn it on? Right? I thought I was supposed to see God." Right. And so that prompted them to actually look at his brain structure to figure out whether that might be something different from what these religious people are feeling, right? Like whether he had either trained his brain not to have those experiences, or whether his brain was preconditioned to just not see things that way. Hey?
Yeah. And I'll just preface this that these studies are still ongoing and still relatively new, but they are fascinating. It says here that these studies suggest that atheists have a propensity, and I think this is what you're saying, Aaron, they have a propensity to engage more in analytical or reflective thinking. If believing in gods is intuitive, then this intuition can be overridden by more careful thinking. This finding certainly raised the possibility that the minds of atheists are simply different from those of believers. And that's something, as I was reading this article, it got me thinking, that's something I never considered before. I just thought, like anyone, I was really raised to pray and believe in God, mostly from my grandma. My parents weren't particularly religious. And then as I got older, started to question things, and eventually just flat out decided that God doesn't exist, that the world is just chaotic. But it never occurred to me to think that maybe it's not just something you unlearn, like maybe it's like our brains are fundamentally different in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's something that you're born with that way, or is that just the way that you can develop your brain? Right? So nature versus nurture, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. So I have a hard time thinking that people's brains are structurally going to make sure that they become religious versus atheist, or analytical versus abstract, right? So it all has to do with experience. Because at the end of the day, we're just trying to make sense of the world around us. It's what our brains do. That's why they're, kind of categorized the way they are, is everything fits into different categories and boxes. So Absolutely. I think if you are following things, like religion or any sort of kind of organized thing, it's just to help make sense of it. And then other people at some point go, well, what else? What if there's something different, right? And maybe that's the path to then developing it further and changing brain structure. I don't know.
I don't think it's a very simple answer. I think that what you're alluding to is my own theories too, is that it's a combination of things. I think there's general intelligence is a factor, but also, like you're saying, Kristin, life experiences, things that happen to you in your life that affect your decision making have a factor. Certainly, who raised you, your sense of community. Who do you surround yourself with? It's kind of hard to get out of religion if your entire community is everyone goes to church, everyone prays, everyone, so it's hard to get out of it. And certainly there have been cases where I've heard of people who have just completely lost their faith and they became social outcasts in their community. The church doesn't want to have anything to do with them. Their families don't want to have anything to do with them. That's really sad, but that also does happen.
When that bell rings, if you're not heading towards service, people get upset.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that loss of community is a big driver as to why people stay in a lot of those situations as well. Like why these cults are so, pervasive and keep these people for as long as they do. Right. It's that sense of community, like you belong.
Right. Have any of you, like, I know this has happened to me, but whenever I get into an argument, and I try so hard, I just don't want to get into it with people, but put into a corner if somehow the conversation starts, and it always seems to be the same. Somebody else who has faith in a higher power, and that's fine. They can believe. I don't care. I'm not trying to change their mind. But they always argue with me, and I'm not even looking for an argument. And it's always the same thing. It's so you're so arrogant that you don't believe in anything. What? So everything's random? I'm like, yeah, everything is random. The universe is chaotic. And they're like, well, that's just so sad. How can you live? How can you go through life like that? I'm like, I seem to be doing just fine.
My religion is science. That's my answer. Right? Like I bow to science. I bow to the idea that we don't know. And the only way that we can know is by trying to reproduce things. And if we don't get the same thing going on, then we try to redo our theory of why it's doing that. That's my whole, right? If religion at any point decided to enact any kind of, rigorous study on any of this kind of stuff, I'd be very interested to see it. But unfortunately, they want people to not think about these things, right? And so my issue is I don't think that intelligence necessarily plays as much of a part in this as your willingness to let go of your logical thought on things.
And that's where I take issue with it as well, as being told this is exactly how it is and you're not allowed to question it, or you're not supposed to question it. Yeah. So like my idea of religion, I guess similar to yours, but mine would just be curiosity. Right? Just remain open to the idea that literally anything is possible in this universe. Anything. Right? So I'm not saying fully that, no, God doesn't exist or anything, because, it very well could. Right? I just remain open, curious, and kind of use my own logical thought process to make sense of things. Right? Because ultimately, we won't know until we're all dead. We won't know.
Exactly. And that's my thing. I bow at the altar of I don't know. Who knows? Maybe there's a God. Who knows? Right? Realistically, is there a God that's really invested in your life and he's coming down to make sure that your prayers are answered and he's doing things? No, I can't get behind that under any, right? Like, unless it's like, I keep coming back to the idea of this being a hologram and potentially that the God idea might be just kind of you seeing yourself and kind of seeing from outside, and you have this kind of somewhat interaction with this hologram from the outside of, maybe in a subconscious, below our level of understanding kind of thing. But I don't believe that it's outside of us, right? I think that's just a manifestation of who we are, right? Versus some outside entity that's coming here to look after us. Hey.
Yeah, the article goes on to say, and this is interesting, the complexity of atheism. The third snapshot is this one. A man is standing against a background which looks like a church. He appears to be doing the sign of the cross with his right hand while his left hand rests on his heart. He's a priest, but not of any church that believes in gods. He presides over the positive temple of humanity, a church for atheists and agnostics created by Auguste Comte in the 19th century. This priest is not doing the sign of the cross, but the positivist blessing. Have you guys heard of this? This is new to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're reading those things out, you should do it in like your best David Attenborough voice, right? Like it should be a documentary kind of feel for those, right? Like where we can just add kind of the grain behind it and it can just be like, like an old documentary style. There we go. He's making the sign of the cross.
Positivist temple of humanity.
I've not heard of the positivist church, although I'm intrigued. I do try to keep up on a lot of those. Just like, hey, what are those guys doing?
Their principal belief that they go by is live for others, which I like. That's a great principle.
Yeah. It is a great principle.
Because realistically, I mean, the only way we're going to get past any of this stuff is with each other. The idea that we can do any of this alone, like you're going to build your cell phone alone, right? You're going to make your own screens. You're going to make your own internet. You're going to do this all by yourself. Like, good luck, guys. We have to do this together.
Yeah.
you know, and the only way we're going to like get off the planet, get around all this war, all this strife, all this agony that we've been, you know, dealing on each other is with each other. And that's the part that I just, you know, from the beginning, I've been looking out into this world and kind of going, well, this answer seems pretty simple, right? If we just kind of let go of a lot of this garbage that we've been carrying around, all this, God told us so, and this is the way it is, and this is the way it must be. It seems like a lot of the issues that we face on not being able to talk to each other, not being able to express, you know, any of these actual things that we need to be able to express to each other to move forward, are just held up by a lot of this stuff. And it didn't make any sense to me, you know?
Yeah.
These people who are, you know, forced to believe that a man lived inside a fish for 3 days, or that, you know, this being came down from the sky and was shooting laser beams out of its eyes. I mean, I just...
Oh, you didn't see that?
It, you know, again, I believe those things, I love Ancient Aliens. Holy crap, what a great show. But the problem is that they bring up actual evidence. They unearth 12,000-year-old monuments made of stone that the archaeologists are saying they were cutting with copper tools. And you look at it and you go, there's no fucking way. You just can't do it. There's just no way that could possibly happen. Right? 12,000 years ago, back when they didn't have the wheel, you're telling me that they had tools to carve stones in perfect laser-like precision. Like, it's just not right. Yeah. So there are things out there that we don't understand. Whether that makes them God, probably not. It just makes them, you know, beings that we don't understand how they're doing what they do. You know, and that, as far as I'm concerned, is our definition of God at this point, right? If you're doing something that we don't understand to a lower person, like if you want to talk about even just, you know, cognitive ability, to a person with a lower cognitive ability, having these thoughts is godlike. You know, to a slug, we're gods, you know? And that's kind of the problem here, is that, you know, we have this idea that puts us above, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, if there were an actual God, he'd be here with us, not above. Okay. And that's kind of where I go, like, if this God was actually for us, doing these things for us, he'd be here right now, and he's not. So, you know, it just leads me to, and whether that's just part of my brain that's wired to believe these things, or whether it's the experiences of, you know, I believe that, you know, part of the physiological part of this is that our brains are connected in certain ways, and certain parts talk to each other better in some brains than they do in others. And maybe that leads to a lot of this, you know, dissonance in how our brains see these structures built around us, whether you see causation in, you know, the butterfly that settled on your finger at that exact moment when you were thinking about, hey, is there a God? Give me a sign. And this thing came and, right, like, you know, was that part of God talking to you? Probably not, but
or
right?
Maybe God is a butterfly.
Altogether possible. That's the thing. Who knows, right? But whether that was a separate thing, or whether through time you came back to alter that butterfly and that made you God, who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, listen.
It's all very different. It all comes down to the fact of I bow at the altar of I don't know. But I love these questions. These are great.
Well,
right?
And that's the thing.
And that's my problem. That anybody that tells you they do know is a liar. And that's my problem with religion right there.
Yeah. Well, right? And that's the thing. The thing that I love about science is that we're on such an interesting, fascinating journey to discover. Like, we're constantly finding new things about our own planet that we had no idea. Wonderful, strange things. Finding out things that we didn't know about ancient cultures that don't exist anymore, and also finding and discovering new species that we haven't known about before. And that's what I think is fascinating. And I love being wrong, and I think that's part of the scientific method. So to me, it's incredibly boring. Like, to just live an entire life of just believing in this higher power, and that's how you're gonna go through life. Like, you just don't care. You just think the universe was created in the last 5,000 years. Like, it's just so foreign to me. I can't compute. But listen to this other brain imaging study that Oxford University did. They compared an image of the Virgin Mary with that of a regular woman, both painted in the same period. Researchers found that when Roman Catholics concentrated on the Virgin Mary while being subjected to electric shocks, this alleviated their perception of pain compared to looking at the other woman. This decrease in pain was associated with an engagement of the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, a region known to drive pain inhibitory circuits. No similar effect was found for the unbelievers, although they rated the secular image as more pleasant than the religious one. But what if the unbelievers being tested were members of the positivist temple and were instead shown an image of their goddess of humanity? Would this have alleviated pain in a similar way to that experienced by the religious individuals? That's interesting.
When I wonder if it activates this, because they've done studies that show that if you're allowed to swear, your pain threshold is higher than if you're not.
Okay.
Right. So people that aren't, like, if you put your hand into a bucket of cold water, you can keep it there longer if you're allowed to go right, than if you weren't allowed to express that frustration, that right. It seems to tie into something in the brain that actually allows you to bypass a lot of that pain structure inside the brain. So whether that religious experience would tie to that same part, I wonder. Right.
Well, it could just be something to attribute the pain to, if that makes sense.
A bypass.
Right. And almost like a placebo effect in a lot of ways, right? So if you have something you can call upon to be like, oh, help me, Virgin Mary, this hurts, then maybe, you would just convince yourself then that it's lesser. Our brains are wonderful for that.
When pain
but then
is
if you
all
don't believe
inside the
that
brain.
there's some entity that can take your pain away, of course you're going to feel it more.
The article ends with it's saying the future cognitive science of atheism will have to think hard about how to move forward. It needs to develop models that account for cultural variations as well as consider the implications of atheists engaging with rituals that celebrate humanity. So obviously this is very incomplete data.
What? You mean they haven't scanned everybody's brain yet?
Not yet, but we're getting there, man.
Close.
And that is actually, and that, again, I bow to the altar of I don't know, because this is the kind of study that wouldn't have been available, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago even? The idea that we can hook, brain scanners up to people and actually watch their brains as they think is just, and we get better at this all the time. It used to be we only had one way of actually even just seeing how a brain was put together, and that was by cutting open their skull and sticking electrodes in there while they were, right? Like, that was our only method of figuring out how this jelly-like structure inside our heads actually contributed to this feeling of consciousness that we had and this expanding knowledge that we've garnered, right? Like, it's just amazing to think of where we'll be 20 years from now when we have actual 3D images of a brain and you can just watch it thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
I'm quite excited.
Okay. So let's talk about the other half of this conversation. Another study about, again, the headline is people with homophobia are more likely to have low IQ. In other words, stupid people are stupid. I'm just kidding. No, I'm.
Well, okay, and
I might be editorializing a little bit there.
Stupid people can be reductionist, and that I think is kind of the, in a lot of ways, it's easier to just go with the flow, and I think that is what's driving a lot of this. Even in the States with what they're going through now, still with this rupturing of their whole democracy at this point, right? Like, some people are seemingly invested in burning it down, and just right?
Well, there's a lot of brainwashing going on, but that's a complicated discussion. So let me just touch quickly on this actual research. So this was actually done by the University of Queensland in Australia, and they're saying they've drawn up links between individuals with lower intelligent quotient levels, and those who express prejudiced views against the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community. I'm sorry for that. They're saying in a study from 2018, the group examined a sample of more than 11,000 Australians and analyzed the data from the 2012 Household Income and Labor Dynamics in Australia survey. Based on the data, the researchers used methods meant to test cognitive abilities of participants, including problem solving, the ability to make sound judgments, as well as their verbal and numeric abilities. Following that, the researchers compared their findings against another study made on the 2015 survey, which queried participants on their attitudes towards LGBTQ rights. One particular question in the study asked them to either agree or disagree with the statement, quote, homosexual couples should have the same rights as heterosexual couples do, on a 7-point scale, with 1 equating to strongly disagree and 7 being strongly agree. What do you think the answer is?
Very inclusive and dynamic.
Okay, so they're saying that contrasting the results of the analysis, they found that the lower an individual's cognitive intelligence, the more likely they were to display homophobic tendencies. Crucially, this doesn't necessarily mean that having low intelligence levels is a cause for homophobia, only that there exists a strong correlation between the two. In the study, the researchers argued that those with lower cognitive abilities were more inclined to stick with binary or black and white thinking rather than interact with other groups with opinions that might change their viewpoints. Sound familiar? Have we heard this before? Have you ever met somebody like that? This avoidance, they argued, acts as a mechanism to avoid dealing with unpredictability, discomfort, and fear that may arise from change, something that is a recurring topic on this very podcast that we always talk about.
Well, and here's a bit of a loaded question for Kristin here. I'm not sure how this one's going to go over, but I guess we'll see. Like, as a therapist, would knowing your patient's IQ be any helpful towards kind of determining a path towards therapy?
No.
Okay.
No.
And that was kind of right. Like, I didn't really think so, but I was kind of wondering whether that might determine like a lot of these kind of looping and blockages to try to get
not
past
at all,
whether,
because as Alex said, it's not necessarily a low IQ does not mean that you're going to be homophobic or you're not going to be racist. It's just happens to be correlated in this particular
even just
study.
In general, not even the homophobic
people,
ones.
Well, it doesn't matter because everyone's wired differently. So it doesn't matter whether you have a low IQ or a high IQ, right? I'm never going to judge a person based off of that because you can have a low IQ and still be very intelligent in many ways, right? And you can have a high IQ and you can be very, very stupid, right? So I'm not going to think that somebody needs more help or needs more change, so to speak, because they have a low IQ.
Absolutely.
Right. It's just
I meant more whether it might be easier for you to figure, I guess it's a therapeutic method associated with, right? Like,
see, to me, that just kind of sounds like putting people into boxes, which is something I don't believe in. Right. So if you're trying to then, based off of one aspect like IQ, to say, OK, your IQ is this, therefore you require this type of treatment, it's reducing people to a stereotype, to a box in and of themselves. And I don't think that's fair.
I'm more thinking of effectiveness of treatment, right? If someone who has a lower cognitive ability is not able to, say, grasp the higher concept, whether it may be easier to just do like a storytelling method or whether it's just a matter of trying to changing the therapy to match kind of the level that they're at. Right. And that's where it's not a judgment thing. It's more a matter of kind of determining, because everybody has their own, right? Like maybe your level on homophobia is very low and we have to start here to get you to a point where you can even accept this. Right. And whether accepting that someone's cognitive ability may hinder that process and will require a couple extra rotations to get them to here might be beneficial, right? Like, so again, not a judgment thing, but more trying to just figure out how we might be able to kind of, I guess, fast track this therapy so that we can get people kind of to here, right?
Well, and that's how good therapy works anyways, is you work with the individual on a case-by-case basis to determine what style of therapy they need, right? So it's not like a one-size-fits-all. So yes, in that sense, you're absolutely right. If a person requires a little bit more, they're going to have a different style of therapy, for sure. But that goes for every single individual that walks through the door.
Okay, so this might somewhat inform the therapy down the road, but isn't necessarily going to help you today in terms of how do I help someone who is actually facing this issue move past this?
Well, no, I mean, of course it would. It's like I said, it's different for every person. So if someone comes in and they have this presenting issue, I'm going to deal with them in their own very unique way. Right? It's a difficult question to answer because every person requires something different.
Right. And that's where, again, I'm more just trying to figure out, like, does this inform us moving forward? Like, would this change any of the kind of therapies available for people facing homophobia, like these kind of actual, like, you know, ingrained, you know, if your family was led to, and now you've decided you want to get out, how do we help people to get past these things?
So I think going back to, you know, like the original subject, right? If it's homophobia and IQ specifically, it's recognizing that it's just a very rigid structure, right? Alex was touching upon that. It's the idea of something that's different is fearful to us, right? So it's easier to just put things into these categories and be like, nope, okay, men belong with women, that's it.
Yeah.
Right? Anything outside of that is deviant, and my brain just physically cannot go there. It's scary, so you just shut it off at the source.
I think to see it's got a dick, so it must be a man, hey? I don't know why they were Australian, but
I'll also say that, I mean, and this article warns of this too, and I can understand how some would also view this as we have to be careful about. There's no definitive link between low IQ and prejudice against LGBTQ groups right now, and also I can understand how some people may view this as like a persecutory attitude towards, you know, certain communities, which I totally get, I totally understand, but I don't think, I don't see this necessarily as an attack against, because I don't, if you want to believe in a higher power, that's fine. I think all this article is saying is that they're currently doing research to see, is there a relation between low intelligence and this certain type of viewpoint? And it's obviously,
that's the thing. Like, if you're simple, it's just as simple to assume that people should be equal as that they shouldn't. You know, there's arguments kind of for or against either one, really, when you get right down to it. There always are. If you know, remove some of the ethics involved. Right.
Well, it depends on what you were taught, I suppose.
Exactly.
Right. And we touched on that earlier. It's your community growing up. If you happen to be in this small Bible thumping town where it's everyone goes to church and you love Jesus and anything, you know, homosexual is sinful, then that's likely how you're going to grow up believing. It's going to be tough to change that.
When then
it doesn't make them bad
exposure.
people or stupid people.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
doesn't, you know, it's just we're all a product of our environment at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's part of our theme here, is that realistically we say the word stupid, but we don't mean stupid like you're thinking. Right?
Yeah.
We have our own.
Well, because that person that we would, you know, maybe see that way in their community, they're not, right?
Exactly.
They could be the most intelligent person in that community.
They are the learned elder of the, you know, the ways that they have been teaching for thousands of years. And just because we view that as somewhat backward, that doesn't mean that it's wrong. or any worse or any, that we're any better or that any of it, right? It just means it's a different way of experiencing this life. And I mean, my thing here has been like, isn't this life hard enough? Right? Like, isn't this hard enough? Like, realistically, do we need to add more shit to this? Like, even if you have a great existence, isn't life hard enough? Like, why do we keep having to make this more difficult than it needs to be? Why can't this just be, we love each other because you're there? And we love the animals because they're there. We love the trees because they're like, why does this have to be so hard? Right? Like we only get a short time here, and why do you got to fill it with vitriol and hating each other instead of just trying to make something better and build something that we can all love and stand back and go, holy crap, we built that, guys and girls, right? Like, why is this got to be so,
that's what's so
all the time.
That is what is so troubling about what is going on in the United States right now, with the Capitol riot and all of that. There's so much brainwashing going on. It's incredibly disturbing, and I hear so many stories from people who, talk about, my mom thinks that my mom's a teacher. She has an education background, and she believes the pandemic is fake and that the election was stolen. How does that happen?
Yeah. Well, it happens because, there's a lot of information out there, and the idea that one person is going to have the truth of all of it is ludicrous. Ludicrous. Right? And so we're all going to have times in our lives where we're going to hold positions that are frankly ludicrous, right? And in hindsight, we're going to look back at them and go, holy crap, we thought padded shoulders were like the shit, right? Like, and that's the problem with a lot of this is that, we live in this culture now where we want to look at people's pasts and hold them accountable for these kind of things instead of recognizing that that's who they were then and they are allowed to be a different person now.
Yeah.
Or we hope that they're a different person now. And I think that's kind of the problem that we're having lately is there's no way of judging someone's entire existence based on one little sliver of who they were. And that becomes a bit of a problem here, right? Because now how do you hold anybody accountable for anything, if we don't have a whole timeline, right? So I go on the hope that we're all trying to get better. And that, again, comes to a very simple idea of why aren't we just looking out for each other? Why are we teaching each other to hate?
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder,
are we though?
Whether when we get more of these brain scans on highly extremist people, like whether we can get some of these criminals hooked up to brain scanners and find out whether there are structural differences that we should be aware of and that might affect how we can treat and how we can move forward and how we can kind of bring everybody into this thing that we're trying to build here. That's the problem. They're excluding themselves from what we're trying to build here, and that becomes an issue. Right? How do you bring everybody into and make everybody believe that this is something that's good for everyone? Impossible.
With all these studies being done about, trying to find these connections between atheism, or sorry, not atheism, but faith-based thinking and persecution of minorities. Man, how fascinating would it be if we could just take a large sample of these people that are so brainwashed, that think the election was stolen, that think the pandemic is fake, and really analyze their brain and see if we can draw any conclusions. Is it that all these people have low intelligence, or is it more than that? Is it just that they bought in, that they're just so invested in this one person being right that they've convinced themselves, almost because the pain of realizing that they were wrong is too much to bear?
I think we also, you touched on it earlier. There's so much information out there that you can literally find facts and statistics to back up anything you want to.
Yeah.
So it complicates the picture a bit more. I don't think it's fair to say this person's absolutely right and this person's absolutely wrong, because they both have evidence to prove themselves right.
Well, so that's not necessarily.
I argue it is.
Alternative facts.
Any kind of research that's been done can be presented in a different way depending on who's describing it. Right. So it is easy to find things to back it up. What's more important is, as we always come back to in these talks, is how to interact with each other, that we have different viewpoints. Right. It doesn't matter what you actually think and believe. It matters how we can talk about it and discuss it in a helpful way to work together. Right. And I think that's what it all comes back to, not trying to convince everybody to be the same, because that would never work. It can't.
No.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very helpful way of looking at it.
That's why we have Kristin on.
That's why I'm here, guys.
Thank goodness. If it were just left to the two of us, I tell you.
Yeah. Nobody wants that.
Where would we be without you, Kristin? Just a couple of dudes grunting on a podcast. Right, well, what were we talking about? Was that
that's all I got on this particular subject. You guys have any other closing remarks or thoughts on that? Doesn't matter. Time's irrelevant.
There is that.
Answer my damn question. You guys have any other closing thoughts?
It comes down to that in the end, doesn't it? Like, how do we just learn how to talk to each other?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have for this week on this particular subject. While you all sit there and process it. Well, yeah, exactly. Enough for today. While you sit there and process all this information here, and of course, encourage you to go out on your own and look at all these different articles here. We always post this stuff in the show notes, and you know what? Make your own conclusions. Draw your own conclusions, and just remember, none of this stuff is conclusive. These are all ongoing studies. We're going to find new information. We're going to find out that things that we thought were correct were wrong. It's just how this shit works. That's life.
Hail science.
Hail science. Exactly. Exactly. Thanks very much for listening. If you like the podcast, please make sure you subscribe to ensure you get every new episode each and every week when they drop. We're available in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn and Stitcher and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, if you prefer video, we are on YouTube as well. Just look us up under the Subvert Podcast. And if you'd like to reach out to us, please do drop a comment down there. Hit us up on Twitter as well. We're at the Subvert Pod across all the social media platforms. You can also write to us the old-fashioned way. Send us an email, thesubvert@hologramradio.org. I might be getting that email address wrong, but you can just go to the website, hologramradio.org/contact. Select the podcast there in the drop-down menu and send us any feedback you have. We encourage it, of course, and we want to hear from you. It doesn't matter if you agree with us or not, because that's not what this show is about. We do not want everybody to agree with us. That would just be boring, right? If all three of us everybody agrees, we only want to hear the good news, right? That's not how we operate.
I am the way and the light. I feel you should know that, though.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I am the way.
You're springing that on us now? Right at the end?
Well, I thought I had made that abundantly
clear. That's the cliffhanger of the episode.
That was clear from the beginning, was that I am right and you guys are here to convince me that I'm wrong.
Oh. Oh, this is new to me.
I just went without saying.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
We'll have to have a
so
talk
far,
after.
Not convinced. So.
Okay.
Try again next week.
Exactly.
All right. Well, you guys stay safe, and we will see you next week. That's all the time we have for today.